Greeting, friends, in the wonderful name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. My name is Mohau Senti. Some of you know me as Housing, Stedele, Ja, Siwelele, Kitaba Yeo, Guanamme, and all of those. Happy New Year to you and your loved ones, friends. May it be a blessing to you for this year. I'm a minister in the Methodist Church, stationed at Matlosana Seket in the Central Synod. I've been asked, heaven knows why, to present and give my thoughts and my reflection on the presiding bishop's address for the extended EC that happened on the 1st of October in 2020. I thank the director for the opportunity to do so. So, well, maybe before I start, I should just pose a question to us and ask, how many of us have read this address before? Did we listen to it last year? And what our thoughts are about it? In all honesty, this is my second time that I read this statement, the address, and I must say this, every time I read it, it seems as if I've been reading it for the first time. It's profound, it's contextual, and it deals with the real issue that we're going through as a church, as a country, and as the international world. So how many of us have read it before, and do we see a need for us to read it? And after reading it, what do we do about it? Do we implement it? Do we engage with the presiding bishop on the sidelines? If you seek clarity on a few things, and do you engage with it as a circuit, as a society, and see what of these things that are being mentioned on the address can we take out from it and use them in the local level. I think it's important that we as Methodists do that. We should not wait for the resolutions or rely heavily on resolutions that go back and forth, instead of taking those things that can work for us and use them and for the growth of the church. That's the first thing. Well, the presiding bishop, in her introduction, giving us what we would have loved as a church to do, and quoting the context that was during lockdown, in the day 189 or so, what this COVID pandemic has done for us as a church, as a community. But she quotes one of Paul's words in, I think, the 2nd Corinthians, saying, "We comfort each other with the comfort that we ourselves receive from God." That for me is profound. As some of us, we struggle, since the previous year, funeral after funeral, death surrounding us, even in our families. We become so exhausted that we run out of words of comfort. However, Paul says to us, as we run dry, as we run out of comforting words to say, we borrow from God, the same God that comforts us. And may we remember that as as we run out of words, things to say, words of condolences to say, um, remember the words of comfort that God comforts us with. I think that is profound. The PB goes on to relate the context that she was in. Like I mentioned, it was 189th day of lockdown, with about 687,000 infections, and about 17,000 deaths. Um, for me, the context is pretty much the same, if not worse. Because as things stand now, we stand on day 296 of lockdown and over a million infections, and the death toll has hit over 35,000 deaths. So the new wave, the second wave, the new variant has hit us terribly, and it seems to be more deadly than the initial. So we are in a very dire situation as we speak. The PB now then deals with the parallel pandemics that were happening at that time: gender-based violence, femicide, corruption allegations and investigations, loss of jobs, closing of companies, and the likes. Pretty much everything still there remains the same. Although, um, if you read the news, you listen to the news, um, there are still cases of GBV happening, where you hear of a 5-month-old baby being killed, raped and killed, a parent killing children. Um, so it depends on what is making news at that time. Would make us think that things have subsided in terms of GBV. I don't think so. The last statistics that say every 3 hours a woman is murdered in the country. It's alarming. It's very much alarming for us. However, we have seen more and more corruption cases happening. We are at a time where we are awaiting an arrival of a vaccine. Um, when would it come? Where does it come from? Who will vaccinate before? And those things. We have seen the closure of our land borders, um, for the sake of preventing more losing of lives. We saw the chaos that happened at Bait Bridge, the border between South Africa and Zimbabwe, where people lost their lives, where people were in a rush to come back to South Africa because Zimbabwe was closing their borders. People died. People were hospitalized. Um, people died of hunger. People did not have water to drink. And You ask yourself in these situations, when you hear people in social media saying we should close the borders, we must protect our people, and you ask yourself, but if you close the borders, um, what about the other people who have families and loved ones who have jobs in South Africa? Do people choose nationalism over Ubuntu? What do you think? Is it right for us as a country to close borders of our brothers and sisters from outside of the country or neighboring countries for the sake of protecting us? We see what is happening in Uganda, where there are elections that happened and the rule of fear and intimidation happening, where opposition parties or opponents were not free to canvass, where a 76-year-old incumbent president who has on his fifth term as a president and has changed the laws for him to run again, threatening a 38-year-old young man who the youth have seen as someone who can bring change into the country. We also see our big brother in America, where there were riots happening um, and threatening the freedom and democracy um, at the Capitol, and the incitement of the incumbent president who is holding on to power. Um, and we ask ourselves, well, this was supposed to be a model of us, but we see now where things are. We're getting used to, as a church, the new normal is to run our services with following protocol and regulations, but we've had to close um, our gatherings, which are regarded as super spreaders um, in the churches. Our carelessness as a country, as a community, or ignorance since lockdown level one has caused more and more losing of lives. We have been losing ministers, more and more preachers, because of funerals and pastoral care that are happening. Um, we are losing members after members as a church. This is a context, like I said, that is far worse. Hence, the presiding bishop deals with the theme now that she was dealing with, and she read in Ezekiel and also the Gospel of John. And in her opening statement, when she deals with the theme, she affirmed, she said there was no need for us to have a new vision statement, to have a new mission statement as a church, because we still believe in a Christ-healed Africa for a healing of nations. She believes that the vision is still intact, it's still something that we should look forward to, something that should focus and work on. Because Africa still need healing. And if Africa is healed, the whole world will be healed. What do you think about that? We as Africans, we as a church, the MCSA, in our current stance, in our current way of living, of doing church, do we have the capacity, the resources, the courage to change Africa? And she deals with she deals with um, thinking thinking um, the circuits, the leadership of the circuits and the societies for reaching out and being innovative and creative in dealing with this pandemic in the way we worship, um, by going through e-services, whether by WhatsApp or Facebook or whatever. Also, what was important for me was how the church reacted, releasing funds for mission and for us to be able to help people that were in dire need, um, or to try and alleviate poverty, or by handing out food parcels and doing gardening and all those things. For me, that showed that the church was active in the world. However, my issue um, would be as it's all good and well to reach people and give them words of comfort and give them words of hope during that time. I serve in a community where, in my congregation, not more than 50 people have WhatsApps where I can send audio um, messages. What about the rest of the congregation? People that cannot afford smartphones, people that cannot afford data. How do we, as a church, as we reimagine healing and transformation, as we try and traverse this journey, how do we reach the poorest of the poor? How do we give them hope in this situation? What do we do to reach out to them? I said, this is for me the main thing. How do we do that? We still have a problem of racism, which is one of the parallel pandemics that was happening. We remember the Senegal thing, the Senegal court thing. Um, Racism is still there, Bazalwan, and we need to deal with it as a church. Maybe it's important for us to deal with it in the church first and deal with it decisively. So as we go out, people know of this. We are in one and undivided church. We need to really stamp it out in the church and wherever we are in our surroundings. We cannot. We believe that all of us have been created in the image of God. If we as the church do not live out our convictions, then it means there's a problem for us. We still have a situation in our education system where young people, through an equal education system, have not had a good year. How then has it affected our country? How has it affected our children? What does it mean for the future of our children? She goes on and mentions the one of the parallel pandemics, which is corruption, um, the PPE scandals, um, and it continues. Every day we wake up and hear of companies that have just mushroomed from somewhere, getting tenders of major millions. How? How then are we going to go through this? We cannot concentrate on this huge pandemic whilst we have these things in the outside that are coming. She goes on and mentions and says, the vision of a Christ-filled Africa is far from being realized. It's very far from being realized. As we see the community, as we see the society, as we see the church, we are reminded of how far we are. However, we, as those who believe in God, cannot lose hope, cannot be discouraged. And she reminds us of who we are as the church, the sent ones, those that have been called out of the world and sent out into the world. The Exodus, the ones who have been called out to change the world, to bring the world back to God. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. We are the ones that have been sent out to partner with God in God's mission. The mission to redeem and transform all of creation. The mission to reconcile the world and the whole creation back to God. This is what we've been called out for. And it is clear what the presiding bishop is saying. We cannot rely on any other thing to lead us to the healing and transformation except being guided by God's mission. It cannot be our individual agendas. It cannot be our petty conflicts happening inside of the church. It cannot be about the power, about somatubas and those that see opportunists when things happen in the church. But it has to be guided. We have to go through that by God's mission. We cannot let anything else do that. She goes on and says, there is no doubt that God is at work healing and transforming the world, even in the midst of the suffering we see. I've seen numerous people when this pandemic was going through, was hitting the country hard, the world hard. People were saying this is God's will. This was God doing this for us to repent, for us to go back to God. I wondered, what are we saying as the church? What message are we saying to the church? I've now seen recently there's been a lot of debates on the social media saying, is God quiet in this situation? Why does God seem like He does not care when 1 million and over people are dying in the country? When we are suffering like this, what is God saying to us? But the presiding bishop is saying there is no doubt. God is at work. But how? You ask how? Well, as I consulted, so I was doing this, and I consulted a number of people, a number of theologians, a number of ministers in the church, and as I was also wrestling with this thing, um, I do not have all the answers. I'm still a student of God, I'm a student of the church, and therefore I cannot claim to know everything. But if we look and see who is this God? What does our doctrine say about this God? Doctrine of God say? What does our theology of this God? Surely we know of a God who is love, a God who does no harm to God's people. Um, our, our doctrine of theology, our doctrine of divine self-limitation, doctrine of theodicy. What does it say to us about this God? If you look at it and ask yourself, well, in South Africa alone, we have over 1 million infections. On the other hand, we have about 900,000 recoveries. Is that not God? The setting up of solidarity funds to help people, the, the speedy production of vaccines. We've had illnesses that have been with us for years, HIV and AIDS, cancer, and all of them have been killing people year after year, and with no vaccine. With this one that seemed to be able to wipe out the world, scientists have managed to create these vaccines. We ask ourselves, is that not God? Is that not God? Is that not God who ensures that the church is active in the world? Us as the agents of God go out there and help and assist other people. Is that not God? Now the PB goes and quotes the text that she's dealing with of Ezekiel, and she looks at it and say, well, Ezekiel was a prophet, was a priest inside of the temple. Now it was time that God takes the priest outside of the temple for the priest to see what God does, what he has the potential to do outside of the temple. Is that not does that not resonate with us? I hear stories of people in social media saying they miss church, they miss gathering, they miss being together in worship and all of that. And the president must please understand that we need that. People are dying outside. Should we be concentrating on that? Should we be really focusing on us gathering and fellowship? Or should we be going out to the world and giving words of comfort and words of hope to the world and showing those that need God most that God is active in the world? I've seen a video trending of pastors and congregations defying the regulations of prohibitions of gatherings, and when the police came to stop them, they threw the police with chairs and stuff like that, and They were claiming that they want to mobilize other churches for other churches to defy the regulations. What are we saying as a church in this instance? Why are we quiet? Why are we quiet? What is the church teaching the community? If leaders of faith are defying the government and pointing out at supermarkets, pointing out at restaurants, pointing out and all of those things, and justifying why we need together, why is that? We have been called, friends, to go out, to be a scattered church. We have been called to be a scattered church. This is an image of God saying, do not give up on God. We cannot, at this present moment, give up on God. What are we teaching our people? What are we teaching our congregation? Where is our faith? Where is our theology? Where is our doctrine in this world at this present moment? What are we teaching about this God who seems like he's quiet and he's not doing anything? While the marks of it show what is God doing. We have an image that we've created of this God, and because we are in total disaster, we want God to act as we imagine him, as we see him. We gather all our theology and all our doctrine and say, but this is how God is supposed to act. While we all know that God is a mystery. He's beyond our comprehension. God is not a God who solves problems, but journeys with us in our problems. And gives us the wisdom, the strength, the innovation to reach out to the world. We worry about the deaths and everything that is happening. But we ask ourselves, what has been our role, our free will? That God has loved us so much that he gave us free will. As we reached level 1, we became careless. We became irresponsible in South Africa. We went to gatherings, we went to funerals, we went to secret locations, and forgetting that we are leaving older people that have comorbidities, and when we come back, we infect them, and we cry, where is God? I don't have an answer, but I'm saying just look at it. Just look at it, friends. God cannot control us. He has given us a free will. But the message is we don't give up on God, because we believe that God is still working. God is still active. However, we, the ones that have been called out, do not seem to realize our role of being guided by God's mission. How do we heal our society? How do we heal our church? If we look at other things and forget about God's mission. Hence, when she deals with the reimagining, she quotes one author, and is profound in that, and saying, the mission of God through Christ is to reconcile humanity and the whole of creation to God's self. This work of God of reconciling all creation flows through the followers of Christ, the church, into the world. Reimagining for the church then means allowing the picture of the reconciled world to propel their actions. So this picture of a reconciled world should be able for us to stand up and act as a church, to stand up and teach our people, to stand up and preach to our people, to stand up and help our people to understand this God that we're in. Now, as she goes on, we join the movement of God's long arc of justice, not the God of personal piety divorced from the pain of the world. Instead, the God who listens to the cries of the oppressed and acts to release them. And so now we need to act on that. As we prepare for this rolling out of vaccinations, God of justice says to us, as a church, we need to be alert and speak out against the state and say, what about the poor? What about them? As you finish vaccinating the health workers, what about the poor who every month on the 15th, from the 15th, join queues to receive the social grant of 350? They've been squashed on together. We saw something in Belleville in Cape Town where people could not social distance, where people could not because of 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 this thing of people need assistance, people need alleviation, and therefore as a church we need to stand and say we have to look at the poor. We cannot. We have to be vigilant and see if the government would want to vaccine themselves first and leaving out the majority of the country. That is the things that we need to join God. The presiding bishop deals about the priesthood of all believers. It's about time now that as we stand up with God, as we join God, calls us to our sacred work, to the experience of God's grace that has the priesthood of all believers. I was concerned as I spoke with a lot of my colleagues, and they will say to me, well, I have to bury about 6 people in a week. And when you ask where are the local preachers to help, and local preachers are saying, well, we are too old, we can't. Some preachers are not even available. I understand that one of people that are old, over their 60s, and have comorbidities. But surely not all of them have comorbidities. What about the younger ones? What's happening there with the priesthood of all believers? When a minister is made a sacrificial lamb for the church. They forget now they are called, but they were waiting in anticipation for the Easter, where they will not be sick anymore, where they will be queuing to join the 7 ways. All 100 of them, all 200 of them are now sick. As we reimagine, would it be wrong for us to ask the YMGs to help us? Would it be wrong to call the Wesley Guilders to help us and say, go and bear it? Because the very same ministers we are asking to go and perform these duties are also people with comorbidities. Some are also in their late 50s. Would it be a sin? Would it be a taboo to ask a YMG and guide them on how to do and run a funeral? A Wesley Gilder? So young people who we believe are able to recover, who do not have comorbidities, to help at the church. Because the church needs people. What has happened to the priesthood of all believers in this situation? Or should it be the ministry of all believers? The presiding bishop deals, as she continues with reimagining. She says, as a church, we need to admit that some processes and structures and methods and traditions need to be reviewed, need to be rethought. How we do things as a church. Is it true? I think it's true. What do you think? Is it time for the church to reconsider? Because we don't know the long run of the economics in the church, in the community. As more people lose jobs and more unemployment rate goes up, what happens to the giving of the people? What happens to the assessments? Is it now an opportunity for a church to reconsider non-itinerant part-time ministers? I don't know. What do you think? What do you think? How do we engage theologically in this instance? What happens to us after conferences? Even after conferences during the year, do we get an opportunity to engage theologically as ministers, as congregations, as colleagues, to try and make sense of what everything is happening? The PB acknowledges the role of JUCOM with doctrinal conversations and theological conversations. Question is, why did it stop? Why is it not happening anymore? It's clearly beneficial for the church. Why is it stopping? Why is it not continuing? For us to as we engage these things theologically, as we engage our doctrines, we are able to form new understanding of God, new doctrines, our Methodism, whether is it still relevant in our times as Africans. We with the reintroduction, the creation of new liturgies and hymns. The work has been going on and going on and going on. What needs to stand? What's happening with it? How long must it go to? We cannot continue as normal. I've seen in my synod the year plans for this year. Everything is the same as it was the last time, the last few years. No one ever said, "Look, let's try something else. Let's do something else. Let's think about how we can do these things." Because we are all in a hurry, we're all anxious to go back, and it will never be the same. Therefore, we are asked to reimagine. We are asked to look beyond the structures, the practices that we have. We need to do that. The presiding bishop now deals with how the church works in terms of instead of us, she mentions a critical thing when she deals with an example of us, of the church refusing to bury someone because of memberships. It's a very important thing that's happening. Contexts are not the same. In some contexts, it is very easy to discard that. In some contexts, it's not. Our people, if you don't encourage them to pledge, they do not pledge. You teach them about sacrificial giving, they do not give. Now, now as a church, we're caught in a dilemma. If we discard this thing of pledging, if we discard this thing of saying, now it means people are not going to give. The more you teach the same people, you teach the minority of people, the majority do not listen. If you don't teach them, if you discontinue this, it means no more assessments. What then happens if there's no more assessments? What do you think, friends? When are we going to come up with a financial model? Because it's clear that this financial model is not working for us anymore. The poor are expected to pay, to give, and to give, and very rarely receive. Ministers work for assessments. There are probationers that are sitting with our stations. Stations are closing. There are instances where supernumeraries are asked to come back and fill in the gaps, whilst there are a lot of ministers, there are a lot of probationers that are sitting down. What are we saying as a church? There are a lot of stations that are being closed, and are closed not necessarily because of COVID, but because the minister that we had, and that is now the church has taken them. Conference decided to take the minister, so we are no longer viable. You find these issues in most circuits. In some circuits close their stations because the conference refuses to give them a person of their preferred race, their preferred color. How do we heal? How do we heal the church? How do we heal Africa and the nations? We still bemoan the issues of justice that are happening in the country, where children are still being abused, where GBV is still happening, where children and youth are still on the sidelines, on the peripheries of the church. How is the 40-40-20 being done at your circuits? Our superintendents dealing with it. Are you as a minister dealing with it? Is the quarter meeting very stringent on that? If those are not done, then how are we supposed to give children and young people the space? The schools, public schools are opening on the 15th of February, whilst the private schools have opened some on the 13th of January. There are a lot of disparities. What are we, the church, saying about those? What happens in the public schools that are not happening in the private schools? What? We are anxious now about the vaccine rollout. Who's going to get, who's not going to get? But the question today is, whose mission? Who is guiding our mission? The PB says we should let God, the mission of God, guide our mission, our vision of healing and transformation. Can we talk into groups and ask ourselves, what are we teaching? What is our theology? Are we teaching the right things? Do we as ministers in training believe the right things? And are we teaching them? And are we teaching those who are teaching others the right theology, the right doctrines about God? Do we need to engage further as a church? And with our experience, develop other doctrines. How are we going to focus as a church to be guided by God's mission, to do God's work? How are you as a minister going to make sure that in your local level, everything that you do is guided by God's mission? May God bless you all. Thank you.